"Give her the empty one." A voice snickered at the firing line. Laughter rippled through the group as a pistol with no ammunition was deliberately slid toward her across the concrete bench. She didn't argue, didn't even glance at the faces watching with cruel anticipation. With steady hands that revealed nothing of her thoughts, she picked up the weapon, methodically checked the chamber, and in a silence that cut sharper than any insult, she lifted it toward the target. What she did next without firing a single bullet stopped the entire range cold. If you believe silence can carry more weight than noise, write respect below. The military firing range stretched across Fort Campbell's training grounds under the harsh Kentucky sun, its concrete benches and steel target frames arranged with the geometric precision that characterized every aspect of military life. Mid-morning brought the usual crowd, drill instructors with weathered faces and permanent scowls, fresh recruits still fumbling with basic weapon handling, and senior personnel observing training protocols with the critical eyes of people who had seen too many mistakes result in preventable accidents. The woman standing near the firing line was not listed on any training roster. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos worked in the administrative section, her daily responsibilities revolving around endless paperwork, supply logistics, and the kind of mundane support tasks that kept military operations functioning smoothly behind the scenes. Her presence at the range was unofficial. She had simply appeared during a brief break between her scheduled duties, drawn perhaps by curiosity or professional interest in watching others train with weapons she rarely had opportunity to handle herself. When she positioned herself near the shooting benches, several recruits exchanged knowing glances and barely suppressed grins. "What's to? He office worker doing here?" Corporal Jenkins whispered loud enough for others to hear, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that young soldiers sometimes directed at personnel they considered beneath their combat-focused hierarchy. Master Sergeant Thompson, the range instructor overseeing the morning session, noticed her presence with amusement rather than concern. In his 15 years of training military personnel, he had encountered countless support staff who harbored fantasies about combat roles they would never be qualified to fill. This seemed like an opportunity for an educational demonstration about the difference between administrative work and actual military capabilities. "Let's see what you've got, Santos," he said with a grin that was more predatory than friendly, deliberately sliding an M9 Beretta pistol across the bench toward her. The weapon appeared normal to casual observation, but Thompson and several of the more experienced personnel knew it contained no magazine and no ammunition, a setup designed to expose her presumed incompetence in front of the assembled group. The gun was completely empty, chambered for 9mm rounds that weren't there, a practical joke that would result in embarrassing clicks when she attempted to fire at targets she couldn't possibly hit. The expectation was clear: she would struggle with basic weapon handling, demonstrate her unfamiliarity with military hardware, and provide entertainment for soldiers who found humor in others' failures. The gathered recruits prepared to enjoy the anticipated humiliation, some already chuckling in anticipation of the awkward moment when Santos would realize she had been given a useless weapon. Their faces reflected the kind of casual cruelty that develops in hierarchical organizations, where perceived weakness becomes a source of group entertainment. But Santos didn't flinch or show any sign of embarrassment. Instead, she picked up the pistol with movements that suggested familiarity rather than uncertainty, her grip automatically finding the proper positioning that separated trained personnel from amateurs. The weight of the empty weapon seemed to register in her hands, but her expression remained completely neutral. The silence around her grew uncomfortable as seconds passed without the expected confusion or protest. Some observers had expected her to complain about the obvious trick being played on her. Others had anticipated nervous laughter or requests for actual ammunition. Instead, she simply stood there, weapon in hand, as though the absence of bullets was irrelevant to whatever demonstration she intended to provide. She adjusted her stance with deliberate precision, feet positioned for optimal balance, body alignment suggesting hours of practice rather than casual familiarity. Her grip on the weapon was textbook perfect, trigger finger indexed along the frame, muzzle pointed safely downrange toward the targets that waited 50 meters away. At that moment, the laughter among the recruits grew louder and more confident. "She doesn't even realize it's empty," one shouted with obvious delight. But the older veterans watching from positions of authority didn't join the mockery. They narrowed their eyes with growing recognition that her weapon handling wasn't random or uncertain. The recruits continued their jeering, their voices echoing across the range with the kind of pack mentality that emerges when groups target individuals they perceive as vulnerable. "Bang bang," Corporal Martinez mocked, making exaggerated finger gun gestures that drew appreciative laughter from his peers. "Don't strain yourself trying to hit anything," another voice called out from the back of the group. "Maybe someone should show her watch. Ich end the bullets come out of." The comment triggered a fresh wave of laughter that filled the morning air with sounds of anticipated entertainment at Santos's expense. But the woman at the firing line didn't respond to the taunts or acknowledge the growing crowd of observers. Her silence seemed almost defiant, a deliberate choice rather than uncertainty or embarrassment. She continued breathing in slow, measured rhythm, aligning her sight picture with mechanical precision, as though the chamber were loaded with live ammunition rather than empty air. Master Sergeant Thompson began to feel the first stirrings of unease as he watched her preparation. He had expected stumbling, nervous laughter, or at least some indication that she realized the joke being played on her. Instead, Santos looked like she belonged exactly where she was standing, weapon raised, completely comfortable with the weight and balance of military hardware. She pulled the trigger. A sharp, dry click snapped through the air with mechanical precision. Without hesitation, she reset her grip, realigned her sights, and clicked again. Each motion was crisp, smooth, disciplined, demonstrating muscle memory that could only develop through thousands of repetitions over months or years of dedicated practice. The laughter began to soften as observers realized they were witnessing something more sophisticated than amateur fumbling. Dry fire practice wasn't a joke among serious shooters. It was foundational training that separated competent marksmen from weekend enthusiasts, and Santos was executing the drill with technical precision that suggested extensive professional instruction. Step by methodical step, she demonstrated advanced shooting mechanics without firing a single round. Trigger squeeze executed with steady pressure rather than jerky pulls, sight picture reset between shots, recoil management technique. That anticipated forces the empty weapon couldn't generate. Her performance was a masterclass in shooting fundamentals delivered without explanation or commentary. Then she did something that transformed skepticism into stunned recognition. Spotting a discarded brass casing on the concrete bench, she carefully balanced it on the pistol's front sight post and raised the weapon to eye level. For 30 seconds, that felt like hours. She held the gun perfectly motionless, the small piece of metal remaining balanced despite the natural tremor that affects even experienced shooters. The range had grown progressively quieter as her demonstration continued, conversations dying away as soldiers realized they were witnessing capabilities that exceeded their own training levels. Only her controlled breathing remained audible, the sound of someone who had learned to manage physiological responses under stress conditions that most of them had never experienced. The stillness of her weapon hold was particularly impressive to anyone who understood shooting mechanics. Maintaining perfect stability while balancing a small object on iron sights required levels of muscular control and breathing discipline that took years to develop. The kind of skill that marked the difference between recreational shooters and professional operators. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, a veteran marksman instructor who had been observing from the side of the range, stepped closer with growing interest. He recognized the techniques Santos was demonstrating. They weren't standard military qualification procedures, but advanced marksmanship methods typically reserved for specialized units whose missions required precision shooting under combat conditions. The mockery had completely evaporated, replaced by uncomfortable silence as the assembled personnel began to understand that their assumptions about Santos's capabilities had been fundamentally incorrect. Sometimes the strongest response is refusing to respond. If you've ever seen silence flip an entire room, share this story. Master Sergeant Thompson, his amusement transformed into genuine curiosity, reached into his ammunition pouch and extracted a single 9mm round. The gesture was both test and offering. If Santos possessed the skills her dry fire practice suggested, one bullet would provide definitive proof. If she had been bluffing or performing rehearsed movements without understanding, live fire would expose the deception immediately. "Let's see if you can back up that form with actual shooting," he said, sliding the single cartridge across the concrete bench. His voice carried less mockery now, replaced by the professional interest of an instructor encountering unexpected competence in an unlikely source. Santos accepted the ammunition without hesitation or gratitude, her movements remaining deliberate and controlled as she loaded the round into the pistol's chamber. She performed press checks and safety procedures with automatic precision, each action flowing seamlessly into the next with the kind of muscle memory that indicated extensive training rather than theoretical knowledge. With one controlled breath that seemed to slow time itself, she raised the weapon, aligned her sights on the center target, and fired. The report echoed across the range with sharp authority, the recoil absorbed cleanly through proper stance and grip technique. The spent casing ejected in a perfect arc, landing precisely where experienced shooters expected it to fall. Her reaction to firing was completely professional, no celebration, no acknowledgement of observers, just smooth transition through clearing procedures before returning the weapon to safe posture on the bench. It was the response of someone for whom precision shooting was routine rather than an achievement worthy of special recognition. A murmur rippled through the assembled recruits as they processed what they had witnessed. The single shot. T had punched through the paper target dead center, creating a hole that would have been considered excellent marksmanship even for experienced personnel. That level of accuracy couldn't be attributed to luck or coincidence. Thompson retrieved another magazine, this time loaded with 3 rounds, and placed it beside the weapon without comment. The challenge was implicit. Anyone could fire one lucky shot, but consistent accuracy required genuine skill that couldn't be faked or achieved through accident. Santos loaded the magazine with the same mechanical precision she had demonstrated throughout her performance, chambered the first round, and fired 3 shots in rapid succession. Each report followed the previous by exactly 2 seconds. The rhythm of someone who understood that speed meant nothing without accuracy, that true marksmanship required balance between precision and timing. When the final echo faded, the mocking voices had completely evaporated. 3 holes appeared in the target's center ring, grouped so tightly they could have been covered by a quarter. The kind of shooting that marked the difference between recreational marksmen and professional operators, whose lives depended on first-shot accuracy under combat stress. The senior instructor stepped forward, his demeanor transformed from amusement to professional respect. "Where did you learn to shoot like that, Santos?" His question carried the weight of someone who recognized advanced skills when he saw them, who understood that the demonstration he had witnessed exceeded standard military qualification requirements. She offered no verbal response, simply placing the weapon on the bench in safe condition and stepping back from the firing line. But those with appropriate security clearances and combat experience began recognizing elements of her stance, grip, and shooting rhythm that weren't taught in standard military marksmanship programs. Whispers began spreading among the more experienced personnel. "She's not just support staff. That's not range training, that's OPA. Rater-level shooting. I've seen that form before, but not in qualification courses." A veteran staff sergeant who had served multiple combat deployments nodded slowly as he watched Santos walk away from the firing line. He had witnessed that particular combination of precision and controlled aggression before in places where mistakes meant death rather than poor performance evaluations, among personnel whose names didn't appear on public rosters and whose service records remained classified long after their deployments ended. Santos didn't wait for applause or acknowledgement from the stunned crowd. She didn't offer explanations about her training background or smile at the obvious shift in the observers' attitudes toward her capabilities. Instead, She simply walked past the assembly of recruits and instructors, moving with the same quiet confidence she had demonstrated throughout her shooting performance, surrounded by an invisible barrier of respect that no one dared challenge. The gathered personnel automatically stepped aside as she passed, creating a clear path between the firing line and the range exit. None of them spoke or made eye contact, their earlier mockery replaced by the uncomfortable silence that follows profound miscalculation. The woman they had dismissed as incompetent office staff had just demonstrated shooting skills that exceeded those of most combat-trained soldiers. The empty pistol remained on the concrete bench where she had left it, properly cleared and pointed downrange in accordance with safety protocols. Yet somehow the weapon seemed to carry more psychological weight than when it had been loaded with live ammunition. It served as physical evidence of a lesson that transcended marksmanship, a reminder that assumptions about people's capabilities could be dangerously incorrect. Brigadier General Morrison, who had been observing the morning training session from the range tower, finally broke the silence with words that carried across the entire facility. Training. Session complete. What you just witnessed is how professionals handle weapons, with respect, discipline, and competence earned through dedication rather than assigned through rank or position. No one argued with his assessment. No one resumed the casual conversation that had characterized the morning before Santos's demonstration. The atmosphere on the range had fundamentally changed, transformed from a recreational training environment to something more serious, more respectful of the skills being taught and the people learning them. For the remainder of the training day, recruits approached their shooting exercises with noticeably improved focus and attention to detail. The casual joking and careless weapon handling that had marked earlier sessions were replaced by concentrated effort to emulate the precision they had witnessed. Santos's brief demonstration had served as a masterclass in marksmanship fundamentals that no amount of lecture or written instruction could have provided. That evening, the story spread throughout Fort Campbell with the speed of electronic communication and military gossip networks. But the details that traveled weren't focused on embarrassment or failure. Instead, personnel shared accounts of witnessing exceptional skill from an unexpected source, of assumptions being challenged and respect being earned through demonstration rather than declaration. In barracks conversations and mess hall discussions, soldiers who had been present at the range found themselves describing not just Santos's shooting accuracy, but the way she had handled mockery with silence, responded to disrespect with competence, and commanded attention through performance rather than protest. Her refusal to defend herself verbally had proven more effective than any argument could have been. The younger personnel peppered senior enlisted personnel with questions about Santos's background, seeking explanations for skills that seemed to exceed standard military training requirements. But the answers they received were cryptic, limited by security classifications and the military's tradition of protecting operational personnel whose service records contain sensitive information. "Some people have backgrounds you don't ask about," was the typical response. "Respect what you can't understand and learn from what you can observe. Not everyone's service record tells the complete story of their capabilities, because sometimes the most important lessons aren't taught in classrooms or firing ranges. They're demonstrated by people who understand that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, that genuine competence speaks through action rather than words, and that respect earned through performance carries more weight than respect demanded through position or rank." For more stories of silent strength and honor restored through action rather than words, subscribe to channel.